Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined once again by somebody who has joined me quite frequently now to talk about the WSL and preview the season ahead. He was on here last season. We're doing it again this season. It's none other than the very smart and knowledgeable and wonderful Rich. Rich, pleasure to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm good. It was a far too kind introduction, but yeah, it's no, always happy to come on and yeah, have a chat.
I know there's plenty to talk about today. I feel like going into every WSL season, it's going to be the most tight and the most exciting WSL season. So I guess it's a good narrative to keep going. But before we start jumping and talk about every single team, how would you rate this summer transfer window of, I guess, the ingoings and the outgoings of the WSL? Did you see any specific trends of perhaps certain players coming in, certain styles that teams are going after? I know we're seeing a little bit of a rise of Asian players coming in, specifically from Japan, and I think that has been a really interesting trend to follow. But from you, and kind of now that things have wrapped up, something that stands out this summer that perhaps hasn't been here before?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. First and foremost, we probably said it was going to be the most exciting season 12 months ago, and we'll probably say it again in 12 months' time. I think in terms of patterns, I just think it. Yeah, I mean that some of the trends have been interesting, like you say, with Man City particularly bringing in quite a few Japanese players on top of obviously Sagawa, who they've already got. But I think it's just, I think it's starting to, and whether people think this is a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I think there's pros and cons, but it is starting to do a little bit like what the Premier League is, where it's kind of Premier League like now with most of the teams. We've seen unfortunately some of those teams that are not linked with Premier League clubs, get relegated, and you've got obviously Crystal Palace come up who are a Premier League club. Leicester City is a Premier League club again now, this season. So I just think you're seeing the strength of that financial backing of the clubs. Obviously a lot of the eye-catching transfers happen at the top, Miedemar and Mariona to Arsenal, and Lucy Bronze to Chelsea, and things like that. But I think even just looking now at what some of the, I don't want to say lesser clubs because that sounds disrespectful, but the outside the sort of big three or four,
Mm-hmm.
the players they're now able to bring in. We just saw Aston Villa pay, like £250,000 plus for Gabby Nunes from Levante, who have been one of the top three or four clubs in Spain, season in, season out. Brighton have brought in internationals from abroad. Liverpool, I think we'll touch on Olivia Smith, another one that was a big money signing. And even, down the league, you look at them, Hayley Raso, to Tottenham. So I think you're seeing the might across the league now of what the WSL is able to do. And like I said, people from the outside may not think it's a great thing. I'm sure WSL fans think it is a great thing because it's bringing more and more high profile players to the
Mm-hmm.
league. But yeah, I think that's the biggest trend, I think, for me, that you'll continue to see it, because these clubs that are Premier League clubs, the Premier League is the wealthiest league in the world, like with its ridiculous TV deals and things like
Yeah.
that. That is naturally going to filter down to the WSL when all the WSL teams are Premier League clubs. And we may get Newcastle in there in the next couple of years. London City may be the outlier, if they
Mm-hmm.
come up. But they've got plenty of financial backing anyway. So,
Yep.
but yeah, I think for me the biggest trend that you are continuing to see now, that maybe the bottom end WSL clubs are able to take players from top end clubs, in Europe. And that's not to be disrespectful to other leagues. They're great. It's just I think the finances here are eclipsing elsewhere, apart from maybe NWSL. We've
Mm-hmm.
seen some world record fees over there. But yeah, I think the WSL now is really starting to show the financial strength it's got outside of the sort of top four or five.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think the fact that you bring up it's all the teams that are going into the season have Premier League backing. And I think we got to see some of that money speak this summer, which will be quite interesting to see how things play out. And perhaps this may be the most competitive season that we've all been talking about. But I wanted to start talking a little bit about Chelsea. Obviously, they are the reigning champions, but they enter a bit of a new era, or perhaps leave the Emma Hayes era. New head coach. They've brought in plenty of decorated players, but they've also lost a lot of their players. Almost, you're talking over 10 players that Chelsea squad has lost now. They've got some young names with the likes of Jean-Francois, but they also have brought in a little bit more of experienced players, you could say, with Lucy Bronze, who you just highlighted. Um, how do you assess this new looking like Chelsea squad, obviously with a new head coach? We saw them kick around during preseason and they've looked pretty strong, but assessing the squad and what we saw from preseason, how do you look at this new style of Chelsea or the new era that Chelsea are coming into that can be perhaps assessed as a bit of a transition era now?
Yeah, I think you summed it up probably right there in terms of a transition. And listen, a lot of the time with teams, when you mention transition, you sort of you associate that with not having success. You know that maybe they'll take a year or two to get up to speed. I don't think that will be accepted at Chelsea. And listen, I fully expect that they will still be competing, and if they win the WSL, I won't be shocked. Yeah, it's been an interesting strategy. I mean,
Mm.
I don't know whether that is, Sonia's influence in terms of a lot of them have been French, French
Yeah.
import, but or what big, but transfers are generally, players are looked at quite far in advance. So maybe they were targets anyway, and Sonia got final say on who came in. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, Lucy obviously, you would expect to start, of course you would, but she is coming towards the back end of her career, and it almost looks like they are prioritizing a bit of a turnover now. Some experienced players have gone out,
Mhm.
over the last few months, players like Berger, players like Mielder, Frank Kirby's gone out, Melanie Leopold, Jess Carter, they've lost quite a chunk of experienced players. And listen, people like Sandy Baltimore obviously are very experienced in terms of they're still youngish, but they played at the top level for some time.
Mhm.
Like some, Bartel from Barcelona, Ribadeira from Paris, so they signed the girl from PSV last week and loaned her back out, and
Yeah.
quite a few out on loan. I think they've got nearly a dozen players out
Yeah.
on loan, and
Almost.
a lot of them in the WSL or the Championship. So maybe they're taking a longer term approach now. Listen, I still expect them to compete, but it is going to be interesting to see how they line up. I think that midfield will be a key area still. I think they've got a lot of attacking talent in it. I think defensively, there's probably a few concerns. Obviously, they've had the blow of, Sophie Ingle has done her ACL as well, so she's going to be done probably for the season. So I think there's a little bit of a gap in the team there.
Mm.
But yeah, listen, I still expect them to be competitive and go for trophies. But listen, if you're Manchester City, if you're Arsenal, Man United, whoever, this might be the season you're looking at and going, maybe they're a little bit vulnerable, but they were vulnerable with 2 games to go of the season last year and they still won the league. So
Yeah.
you can never, ever rule Chelsea out. And obviously, Sonia is a very good coach. So she's obviously recruited players that even if she hasn't worked with them direct, two have come from PSG, one's come from Paris FC, one's come from Montpellier, she'll know them. So yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating. I think it was fascinating anyway. As soon as we knew Emma was leaving, what was this new era of Chelsea going to look like? And I think, yeah, we're close to finding out. But yeah, listen, I obviously Sam Kerr still to come back in as well. So
Mm.
yeah, I fully expect them to be right in there. Can you say for certain they'll win the league? No, but I don't think you can any year.
Yeah.
It's so competitive, but yeah, I expect them to be in there. But how they actually line up and their kind of style, it'll be interesting to see. Based off their preseason friendly the other week, it doesn't look like they're going to be short of goals anyway.
No, it's quite interesting. It's a group that knows how to handle pressure and work under pressure, and like you mentioned, be vulnerable with it could be a game or two and everything's on the line. And Sonia Bompastor has also been in that position many times across her career as a player and a head coach. And I'm glad you brought up Sophie Ingle. Obviously, quite devastating that she's out for the season with an ACL injury. But looking in that midfield, it's a bit of a concern, it looks like, not just for numbers, but also experience of who actually can play in that midfield. They've talked a lot about Champions League aspirations, which is certainly big goals to put up as in a bit of a transition era. And obviously, Chelsea, like you highlighted, you cannot count them out. They're always going to be competing. But is that too far to say they're aiming to win the Champions League when that midfield is still a bit of a worrying department, I think, to say the least?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if it happens this season. I think there's too much change there to take on teams that are as solid and Barcelona. Okay, Barcelona manage their managerial changes very well in terms of they just generally promote the
Yeah.
assistant. They did that with Jonathan. They've done it again this summer. The squad hasn't changed an awful lot, and what they do is they generally will add one or two big names. They've obviously brought in Ava Pio. You cannot. That was maybe one thing he said. Maybe Barcelona needed an out and out number nine,
Yeah.
and probably got about the best one that they could. So, Leon, maybe there's a little transition there. They've also got a new head coach in Joe Montemuro. Yeah, the midfield's an interesting one. Like you say, Ingles out. Melanie Leopolds has gone. Mjelder's now gone. Obviously, she wasn't a regular starter, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot. Listen, there's so much talent in that midfield, but
Hmm.
it's that deep lying position. Shoka Nushkin's a top player, but she likes to go forward. She's got that box to box. Erin Cuthbert maybe can sit a little bit, but again, likes to drive teams forward. Bartel's very young. I have to say, the Dutch girl, from FC20 that's come back from loan. I
Hmm.
think really impressive in pre-season. So, they've obviously
Captain,
got
yeah.
Jean-Francois from PSG, but didn't have, a huge amount of football last year. So, I think she's going to take a little bit of time
Hmm.
to get up to speed fitness wise. So yeah, listen, there's constant for a team like Chelsea in 80-90% of the WSL games and probably the Champions League group stage, you might get away with it. And listen, if a team like Chelsea goes and recruits again in January, it's not going to be a surprise. They've
Yeah.
done it regularly. They did it last year, obviously, with Ramirez, who was an unbelievable signing. So, if they need to do it, they will. A team like Chelsea can probably get by until then.
Yeah.
And then obviously the sort of the serious business starts with the Champions League knockouts, which we
Hmm.
fully expect to be in the FA Cup. So yeah, there's one or two maybe in there that could fit in. The younger players if they
Yeah.
step up. And there's been a sign or two in pre-season that they may be able to, but yeah, the Ingle injury hasn't helped. Obviously, in terms of it's just another option gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see. I think they've got enough in the attack, like I
Hmm.
say, still to come back. Me official to come back.
Hmm.
We haven't still probably seen the best of Macario yet.
Yeah.
She's to get going. Lauren James, Hermano's coming on as well. I really like her.
Mm.
Aggie Beaver Jones, had a great
Yeah.
year. So, listen, they're going to have enough with the WSL. But yeah, in the big games, it'll be interesting to see how they handle it and how they set up.
There's certainly no lack of talent in that Chelsea squad. And hey, I mean, readjustments and reinforcements can happen in January, and that's always a very interesting window because it just depends where the club is and kind of the fixtures that they've got coming up. But talking about another team that has also had to work with injuries, perhaps not necessarily last season, but the season before it, Arsenal. They've brought in small numbers when it came to this summer window, but it's been coined as large effect with obviously Caldente, Kafaji in the middle, another goalkeeper that's supposedly their number one now. I mean, is this hopefully the squad and the recruitment that the team has needed to do to get over what I would say their biggest enemy is the low block? It's also quite interesting that we're talking about this surely after they just lost their first leg of the qualification in the Champions League qualification round. And it was kind of a similar story of they've got the possession, they've got the chances, but it's not being able to finish. It's a lack of being clinical and then just caught with way too much space where Katie McCabe was. Um, is it going to be a similar story, or is Arsenal going to be hoping that the players that they brought in can hopefully fix some of those reoccurring issues, so it feels.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, tonight probably was not Exhibit A in terms of that change in this season. I mean, they were a little bit unlucky. I generally I didn't catch the whole game. I caught bits of it. They hit the crossbar a couple of times. The keeper made a couple of good saves. You got to remember Harkin a
Yeah.
mid-season, so they're a little bit more up to speed. But they've also lost some key players, including Kafaji to Arsenal. So yeah, I mean they haven't done a lot, have they? They've kind of stuck with stability, in terms of regular. Miedemar wasn't a regular starter towards the end. Obviously, she was working her way back to sort of full fitness. A couple of goalkeepers have gone. Gio's gone. She wasn't really featuring. Lacasse was a bit, in and out.
Yeah.
So there's not been massive changes. Van Domsel has come in. Obviously, Zinsberg, we got the nod today. Kapaji, as we mentioned, and then Mariona. So yeah, I don't know. It's they've got to find a way. I think those two will be big part of that. It's going to take a little bit of time. Of course, it is whenever you introduce new players, and I think they'll
Yeah.
still have enough in the tie. I think Mariona will be a big part of it. That's what you expect when you bring players in like her that will create, and she will score as well. And yeah, Kafaji be a really interesting one. I literally wrote a piece on her today, speaking to some of her former coaches, and yeah, they didn't have enough. We couldn't have had more things to say about her positively in terms of how good she is. So, but again, very young, stepping up to a tougher league. It's going to take a little bit of time. Sunday's a big one, and they're playing Manchester City straight off the bat. And it's that opportunity to only play 22 games. We say it every year until they expand this league. If you have a tough start, it's hard to catch up. And listen, no one's going to be shocked if Arsenal beat Manchester City, but based on what you've seen from the two teams tonight, Man City will go into that game with a huge amount of confidence. If they can stay solid,
Mm.
you know, they can get at that Arsenal defense. I say Arsenal could have scored a few, but they could have conceded more than they did. Listen, you'd expect to see one or two changes. You'd probably maybe Leah Williamson back in.
Hmm.
Uh, you're right. McCabe got caught out on the goal, so yeah, things to work on. Like I said, with maybe Chelsea being in a transition, you want to be up to speed. If
Hmm.
if one of them loses that game on Sunday, it's you're playing catch up straight away, which you can't afford to do in this league. So they've got to learn from it. But yeah, I saw a tweet from someone tonight saying, "How many times have we said this? Over the last 12 months with Arsenal?" So they've got to find. I mean, listen, there's so much attacking talent in there, and when it clicks, it clicks. But it is happening a little bit too much where teams put out a very solid unit defensively and in the midfield, and they
Hmm.
just can't crack it.
Yeah. I mean, the first line of your answer was perfect. They've got to figure it out. I think certainly the roster, it's a set of players that should be able to figure it out. It's a matter of being able to put all the pieces together on the training ground and executing on during the game. So that'll be certainly interesting. And there's no easy start here, like you highlighted. They start with City, but City are a team who were in it. I mean, it was their title until Bunny Shaw got injured, and it was almost like the worst timing for them to lose their star player. Um, Perhaps unplanned, but she goes into Sunday rested. Um, Goals were flowing tonight, but the goals were flowing. It felt like the majority of the season, really last season. It was if it wasn't for that Brighton loss, which certainly comes back to haunt some of the fans, it really could have been their season at all. And so, what is it that you saw from that team that clicked and that finally got going? That they must try to continue this season because they can catch Chelsea out, and certainly Arsenal in some ways have their own issues to solve and fix before things get rolling.
Yeah, I like that they've got different options now. I think, there isn't a team living in the north and working in the north of England that I've watched more over the last 10 years and watched them develop from a team previously under Nick Cushing that was very effective. A lot of British players, they stuck to what they knew. They were well drilled. They obviously won the league back in 2016, but they didn't then evolve as Chelsea and Arsenal did, with sort of the bigger foreign signings. And now you look at the team and like there's so much international talent in it, and they've added more to that this year. And I just like what they've done. Listen, I'm not getting too carried away because I was a little bit disappointed with Paris FC. I
Right,
didn't think
yeah.
that they put out anything like the, you know, the sort of performance maybe we expected. Nadozi in goal had a tough night as well. I think there was probably a couple in there that she'd be a bit disappointed with, and also she was outstanding last year in that Champions League when they had and for Nigeria. So
Mm.
yeah, it's interesting what they're doing. We mentioned at the start the sort of Japanese influence now. I mean, I love watching Japan. I watched them at the Olympics. I thought they were brilliant at the World Cup, and they've obviously already got Hasegawa. Shimazu's obviously injured, which is a shame. But I thought Fujino was very good
Yeah.
tonight. I think they're super young talent. They've obviously brought the goalkeeper in as well, which will be interesting because they've obviously got Kara Keating as well, who's very highly rated. And they've still got that younger aspect. They brought a couple of young English girls in that can develop, and then obviously Miedemar as well, which was the probably the biggest one. And yeah, as you said before, they did it all tonight without Khadija Shaw, and that's a whole other story in terms of what happened there. But yeah, they have different ways now. Even last season when Shaw got injured at the end, and I still think back to that Arsenal game that I went to when they were 1-0 up, they were pretty in control, and Arsenal scored those two goals right at the end, and that basically cost Man City the lead. They didn't really have a plan B with Shaw out. It was kind of Chloe Kelly had to sort of go up front. Mary Fowler came in as a very good player. And now they've got that still. Chloe Kelly came off the bench tonight. They've got Fowler, they've got Lauren Hemp, who's an outstanding player. They've got Shaw to come back in. And then they've got that technical ability of Miedemar. They've got Fujino, they've got different options now, not just in terms of the amount of attacking players, but their styles.
Hmm.
Just think there's going to be a little bit more about them in terms of a little bit more unpredictability. I think a massive
Hmm.
one was about keeping him. I think there was a lot of probably people towards the end of last season when it got to sort of March, April, and there were rumours of Barcelona thinking, is this going to be another summer where Man City lose one of their best players for free? And they tied her down to a long-term contract. They also tied Shaw down as well earlier last year. So I think they're in a good place. I really do. I think
Yeah.
you're saying now who's maybe likeliest to take advantage of, like you say, Chelsea maybe having a small transition. I think it'd be Man City.
Mm.
Again, it's massive to start well on
Yeah.
Sunday. They go down there and they get a win. That's a big statement because it's been a tough place for them. It
Yeah.
always Arsenal, but man, it always seems to be a place. Doesn't matter how well they play, they struggle to get results down there. Yeah,
Mm.
I'm interested to see how it goes. But I just think now, and listen, a word for Jess Park as well. I mean, I've been a big fan of Jess Park for a few years. I thought she was, I think her and Fujino probably were the best players tonight. But I
Yeah.
mean, like second goal, Jess Park, the second goal was, I mean, she started by the corner flag and she's played like 3-1-2s and ended up in the 6-yard box, slotting it home.
Mm.
But unbelievable goal. And yeah, even her, if she brings a bit more end product now and keeps developing, they've got so much in that attack. We know they can
Yeah.
back and keep clean sheets. So yeah, like I said, won't go OTT because
Hmm.
I Paris will be low par.
Yeah.
Sunday will be a big one to see where they're really at. But signs are encouraging.
Yeah. I like the squad, and when you brought up the aspect of them being a little bit unpredictable, that's exactly what sticks out for me when you look at the recruitment and the players that they've got within the squad and the mix of just toolboxes that they have. I think for me that is what I'm most interested in watching, and hopefully Sunday that's where things get kicking off. United and Liverpool were neck and neck, so it felt. Last season, obviously Liverpool did overtake them on the table. Liverpool have lost some players, but I thought they've also done some decent recruitment to kind of fill out some of these spots. The big name, obviously, with Olivia Smith, it was a big, big fee that they paid for her. Obviously, a huge signing and a player that comes in with a lot of hype, rightfully so, had a fantastic first pro year at Sporting. And they're certainly now looking at how they're going to replace her. But for Liverpool, she's a huge player to bring in. Matt Beard has talked plenty about how he's excited to work with her and get her developing. But rightfully so, United have done some new recruitment, bringing in Elizabeth Turland up top. She was outstanding for Brighton last year. But I do feel like it's still going to be a battle between these two in that kind of third to fourth spot, even. I feel like Liverpool can probably continue with that upward trajectory. Looking at their current squads and how they left off, and perhaps even some of their preseason fixtures, which we didn't get to see plenty of the United ones, like actual footage and whatnot. But is it going to be Liverpool's or United's in that fourth spot? Don't have to make predictions, but how would you assess this?
Yeah, I mean, Man United would be disappointed if it's not them. I mean, last season was, horrific for them in terms of the league season. They just never got going. They obviously were okay, on the one-off days, like the FA Cup, where if you play well on your day, you're going to go as far as you do, and obviously they won it. But yeah, I'm going to be really interested to see how United sort of bounce back from it, because it was really, really poor compared to how good the season before was. When they took the title race down to the last day, they got to the FA Cup final. I mean, yeah, listen, they lost Alessia Russo, they lost on a Badge, but they didn't lose much. The team was still pretty settled, and they added some good players. And at the start of the season, I thought there was some good signs. I remember going to I went to the two games at Leeds Sports Village. They played Arsenal very early on, and they very nearly beat them. I think it was Lacasse scored a worldie in stoppage time, and even PSG, they gave them a game, given that was their first Champions League match against a very established team. And I was looking at Mallard and JC and some of the other players they brought in and going, this looks okay. They're competing here with the top teams. And then it just never really, really carried on. I was kind of happy-ish with their summer. I didn't want to see another year where it was like 10 in, 10 out. It doesn't work. It's too much turnover for a top side. I think it's 6 out, 6 in, which is about right. And again, listen, they've lost
Hmm.
some big players in the team. Obviously, the captain, Katie Zeller, Mary Earps has gone, Lucia Garcia. Nikita Paris is an interesting
Hmm.
one. She probably maybe the right time to go, but she did have a very good year.
Yeah.
The big question is how do they integrate the new players? Because that's always the big question mark that Mark Skinner ends up having against him is, how does he integrate these new signings? And, the recruitment's been good. It hasn't been spectacular, but it's been good. That they've added some experience, which I think that team needs. They need winners. They need people that know how to get across the line. They've done that in people like Dom Janssen. Mallard permanently is okay. I'd still like to see a little bit more from her than last
Hmm.
season. Erland obviously had a great year. I really like Anna Sandberg. I think it's going to take a bit of time, but she's a very talented youngster. And similarly, Awujo. I really, really liked watching her for Canada. I think I don't want to say that's what they're missing in midfield, but I think she'll be an important part of the midfield because I think that is what United have struggled with.
Yep.
Um, they've always been reasonably solid at the back. They will score goals with the players they've got. The midfield's never. It worked a few years ago, and then they started to change and chop and change a little bit last year, and it didn't quite settle. So I'd like to see Abuja go straight into it. Yeah, they need a big year. I mean, it's hard. I mean, say this every year, there's
Yeah.
which is not to disrespect Liverpool, but you've got to remember they've only been back in the WSL for 2 years. I think when you
Yeah.
talk about the big four, you think about Arsenal, Chelsea, Man City, Man United. But even being the big four, it doesn't necessarily get you Champions League. Year in, year out, one of them's always going to miss out. And if a Liverpool or someone else, nudges their way in there, it's even harder. So you can have a great year, and I
Hmm.
think it was the season before where I think all four teams were neck and neck the whole way, and one of them missed out by a couple of points, and you're going, they've not even had a bad season, and they've ended up fourth and out of the Champions League. So it can happen, and United is starting from a long way behind their rivals because they had such a tough year last year, and Yeah, listen, we say Chelsea are in a transition. I don't think anybody expects Chelsea to drop out of that top three.
No.
Do you expect Arsenal to drop out? Do you expect Manchester City to drop out after what we just said? It's hard. So
Yeah.
again, they've got to hit the ground running. At least one of their rivals is going to drop points this weekend.
Yeah.
They've got a home game at Old Trafford. West Ham, maybe again, people might expect to struggle. So they've just got to start picking up points early on. But I always think with Matt Skinner, he will want to drop on a settled team. I don't think he likes chopping and changing. Sometimes you've got to, they did pick up injuries last year, which sort of forced his hand at times. But yeah, I think there hasn't been too much change. There's been enough to probably add little bits that they need.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see them sort of, they don't have the Champions League, obviously, with the distraction of that. So
Mm.
they need to hit the ground running
Yeah.
if they're in that conversation. If they don't, I don't see them over the 12 months. Don't see which one of those top three they get ahead if they don't start well.
I agree. I think with United, they started off with pretty convincing momentum, and then it dropped off, and it seemed like it was almost that PSG loss that really sucked a lot of that momentum away from them, which was quite disappointing. But I wanted to quickly give a shout out to Brighton because I remember that was one of the teams that you spoke plenty about last season when we did this preview, and you talked about obviously the facilities and how solid their recruitment has been. I think this year we're seeing the likes of Frank Kirby, Nikita Paris, kind of the big recognized internationals go into a squad that has a fair amount of youngsters. So you're seeing that veteran youngster element that maybe Brighton not always had. Is it finally going to click, or is it going to be another one of those disappointing seasons of just instability? And it's like, right, we'll start fresh next season. And it's the same conversation again.
Yeah, I mean, there is no team I would like to see it click more than Brighton, and that's not because of any affiliation or anything. It's just like you say, every year you sit there and go, they've done really well. They've had a really good transfer window, and I feel like we've said that for at least the last couple of seasons.
Mm,
Probably this one more than ever. And again, it comes back to what I said at the start about, I suppose, the players that these clubs can attract now. I think I'm not expecting fireworks. There's probably been too much change,
mm,
maybe change that was needed to move forward. There's a hell of a lot of players gone in and
yeah.
out. New head coach, obviously, as well. So yeah, I just have a quiet season. Don't get rid of the manager, whatever's happening. Unless it's absolutely disastrous. This is your plan. They brought obviously Dario Vidosic in. They brought all these players in. Give him the year. See how it goes, and then
Mhm.
just build. Because from what I've heard, he's quite a highly rated coach.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen, the recruitment on paper has been very good. They've added, like you say, top level experience from some of the top WSL clubs like Kirby, like Paris, Sankovic as well from Chelsea.
Mm,
And then Kiko Seke, has had an unbelievable
yeah.
year in Japan, really talented player. It's always just so, I'm sure it's not random, but it always feels it because you've kind of got, they've brought these experienced heads in from the WSL.
Yeah.
Then they've brought a talented young player in from the championship, a couple from the championship, I think, actually.
Hmm.
One from Sweden, one from Scotland, two from FC Twente, one from, and you're going, there is a plan here somewhere of who they, but it
Yeah.
always it seems so scattergun in terms of where they bring their players in from, and then a couple of really talented loans,
Mm,
Lamela from Barcelona, Aguiman from Arsenal, and yeah, you're looking at the attack and going, okay, Villamala, Aguiman, Kiko Seke, Kirby, Paris, people like that, and obviously a
mhm.
few that they've still got, and you go,
Yeah.
that's a team that should give people a lot of problems.
Hmm.
But it will probably take time to gel. But yeah, I don't want to be sat here in 12 months again going, Brighton, new
No.
manager, hosting new players. Like,
Yeah.
I went down there I think it was January, and actually had a tour of the facilities, and like, it is incredible what they have. Like, I've never been to a train. I went to Lyon's training ground in the summer. It's not as good as Brighton's. Like,
Mm,
Manchester's not as good as Brighton's. Like, what they have. when you walk around. It's like a holiday park. It is unbelievable how big it is,
Yeah.
what they have. I mean, even the dedicated women's building was like
Mm,
ridiculous. You go, they have got everything they need here. It's a Premier League club. It's always been well run. Like what they've done in the Premier League is outstanding.
mm,
Uh, yeah, if it doesn't work, you've got to start asking questions of people behind the scenes because like it
yeah.
have everything they need to. I'm not saying get in the Champions League. Listen, they've been pretty open saying they want to be in the top four,
Mm-hmm.
but they have what they need to be a top half team. They
Yeah.
really do. But I'm not expecting it this season because I think it just needs to be a solid, quiet season where you just, pick up results where you can,
Mm-hmm.
have a cup run, and then keep that team together, add a little bit to it next year, and really go at it in 12 months' time. But yeah, listen, the recruitment has been eye-catching, but we have said that a lot with Brighton. So I will be fascinated to see how it goes.
Yeah, I think when you discuss Brighton, it's always like you highlight they've got the pieces, they've got everything, and then there's a sacking midway half the season because things aren't going their way, and it's like just for one season, give them a chance to not sack the manager, and I hope to see that stability because I feel like there's a lot that can come from that team and a lot that can be built on. Rich, I know this is going to be an exciting, fascinating WSL season, among with many of the European leagues that are happening. You cover those in great detail. I know you've highlighted earlier the Lyon new head coach, Joe Montenegro. You've done a recent interview with him. Kafaji, obviously, you said you've spoken to some of her former coaches. The Brighton facilities, you've covered those as well. I'm sure plenty of more coverage is going to be coming on your Substack. So where can people follow some of those pieces that I've just talked about? And really be, in the loop of the football chronicles because they are really, really good quality stuff. Let the people know.
I appreciate that first and foremost. Do you know what? It's really embarrassing, but I forgot the link of my own Substack, but it is on my Twitter. So anybody that follows me on Twitter, it is on there. It's in my bio. I did just want to mention quickly Liverpool, like 'cause I feel like I completely ignored them when you were talking about them, and I rambled about Man United.
That's all
But
right.
yeah, like they've gone the other way from Brighton. Like obviously
Mm,
they've got really consistent, not brought many players in. You mentioned Olivia Smith, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they get on because you need a little bit of consistency, but I think once you get the foot in the door, like they did in terms of finishing fourth, you need to progress, and it's have they done enough, to not be a little bit overtaken. It might take them a bit of time to get Olivia in as well, because obviously she's been at the 20s World Cup. So yeah, I just didn't want to ignore them when we mentioned them a little bit earlier, but I hope they do well, and I think they'll be fine, but I just don't know if they've maybe added enough to stay above one or two of the teams that was kind of pushing them last year. But
hmm
Matt, very good coach, knows the league very well, and he'll probably be the first one on the phone to me if he proves me wrong. But yeah, I hope they progress because listen, Liverpool should be up there. It's a massive, massive club. And I do like the signing of Olivia a lot. I think she's a top talent, but it's just might teams find them out a little bit if they haven't changed too much from last season.
Can they adapt to the players that they've lost? Can they gel in the few players that they've added? Can Olivia Smith recover quickly from that U20 World Cup? I mean, Canada didn't go too far in anyway, so it's not like that she's had a load of minutes to recover. Rich, you said your Twitter, your Substack. I'm gonna leave everything in the link down below. Anywhere else that I should be leaving or letting people know
No,
about?
I have never got into the world of TikToks and things like that. I just write. Yeah, I tried to. When you always get to the start of a new season and like you feel a
Yeah.
little bit and like, okay, I think like everyone knows, and I'm sure you're the same with this. Like you go through phases where it's a bit of a labor of love, and you get to the end of the season, and you're like, oh, and then obviously I went into the Olympics, and then had a few weeks off, and yeah, I got some cool things coming hopefully. So yeah, I've toned down a little bit in terms of going with I hope quality rather than quantity. In terms of some of the ideas I'm working on, but yeah, I'll won't bit many games. I never am. A lot of what I do is not around the game coverage and the sort of daily news. try and bring people something a little bit different. So yeah, working on a few things at the moment, and then but yeah, once the season starts, you get back into the chaos.
Absolutely. It's always quality with whatever Rich writes. I'll leave everything down below. It's not your typical, this is what happens in the game, this is what is going to happen next game. It's a lot of intricate, really niche stories that sometimes go untold in the game, and Rich is always there to tell us these
They're,
stories.
they're too niche out. They even half the stories like I can't even think where I come up with the ideas sometimes.
Oh, they're brilliant. They are fantastic. Everything's in one place. I'll leave it down below. Rich, as always, thank you so much for joining me. And yeah, hopefully maybe we can debrief once the season is over and reflect on Brighton again.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. Thank you.